Meghan and Harry are indeed likely going into Australia.
They are deadly serious. They do not want the state to be footing the bill for these people to come who they feel insulted them.
I have been following this story for weeks, and honestly, it is difficult to know where to begin, because every single day seems to bring a new development that makes the whole situation even more chaotic than it already was. I do try to be fair when covering stories like this, but what is happening with Harry and Meghan's upcoming Australia tour is genuinely one of the most disorganized, controversy-filled, and baffling royal-adjacent events to report on. Once the full picture starts to come together, it becomes much easier to understand why so many people are confused by what is unfolding. The story began a few weeks earlier when rumors started circulating that Harry and Meghan were planning some kind of trip to Australia. When those rumors first surfaced, Meghan's team came out publicly and denied them. Their position was direct and completely clear. They said they had absolutely no intention of going to Australia. That was presented as the official line, unambiguous and final. It looked as though that should have settled the matter right away, but that was not the end of it. Soon after, someone began digging a little deeper and found that trademark applications had been filed in Australia. These were not random filings. They were trademarks specifically linked to Meghan's lifestyle brand, as ever. What made the discovery more striking was that these applications had not been filed recently as some last-minute response to a new trip. They had actually been filed back in 2024 and were granted in 2025. That meant this was not some spontaneous idea. It had been in motion for quite a while, and that made the earlier public denial far more interesting because it suggested that something had already been developing behind the scenes. Then the situation became even more absurd once Australian consumers started going through the list of goods covered by the trademarks. The range of products was so unusual that many people could not help but laugh. The list included gardening hoses. The idea of an As Ever branded gardening hose immediately struck people as ridiculous. It was the sort of detail that made the whole venture feel strange rather than polished. People began imagining walking into a local hardware store and seeing a Meghan Markle signature gardening hose on the shelf, and the image alone was enough to make many of them shake their heads. The trademark applications also covered clothing, which at least felt more expected for a lifestyle brand. There were teas, which again seemed fairly standard, and candles, presumably the wickless sort she has been promoting. But alongside those were so many random household items that Australians began flooding inboxes with messages saying they could go to Target and buy the same kinds of things for half the price. That reaction quickly became part of the wider mood around the brand and the trip.
Her and her flowers and tea and honey, she's charging $300 tax and shipping. And you can literally go to Whole Foods, a very expensive grocery store, and get all that for like $50-$60, depending on what flowers you want.
That leads directly to a major issue surrounding the whole As Ever venture, and that is the pricing strategy. Anyone who has looked at the products released so far knows these are not budget-friendly offerings. One example that stood out was a flower arrangement set that included flowers, tea, and honey. The whole package was being sold for around $300 before tax and shipping. $300 for a collection of fairly ordinary items immediately raised eyebrows. A number of people pointed out that someone could walk into Whole Foods, which is already known as one of the more expensive grocery stores in America, and put together almost the same set of products for around $50 or $60, depending on the flowers they chose. That comparison made the pricing issue hard to ignore. The same model is now being taken into Australia, a country that already has excellent produce of its own. Australian honey is widely admired, Australian flowers are beautiful, and Australian teas are highly regarded. That means the brand is entering a market where local alternatives are not only more affordable, but in many people's eyes, just as good, if not better. Expecting consumers there to pay premium prices simply for the As Ever name is an ambitious move, but the pricing is only one part of the confusion. The trip itself is where things start to get much messier. As far as people understand it, both Harry and Meghan are expected to travel to Australia. Harry is scheduled to speak at some kind of mental health in the workplace event in Melbourne around the 15th and 16th. That detail struck some observers immediately because the irony did not go unnoticed. This is the same Harry who has been involved in legal battles, who has spoken publicly about family rifts, and who, according to various reports, has also been associated with fairly stressful workplace environments through the staff turnover connected to their different ventures. So the idea of him speaking about workplace mental health was, at the very least, a notable choice. Still, that is meant to be Harry's part of the trip.
Why are people lining up to shake our hands? This is so silly. And, I can't believe I'm not getting paid for this.
Meghan's part is apparently a girls' getaway weekend being organized at the Intercontinental Hotel in Coogee. Coogee is a beach suburb in Sydney, and locals have their own jokes about the place. It is said that Coogee is an Aboriginal word meaning smelly, connected to historical issues with water quality in the area. Locals even have a rhyming nickname for it that is far from flattering. That background alone has added an odd layer to the trip because the setting, which is meant to sound luxurious and appealing, is already being discussed by locals in a teasing and mocking way.
A lot of money. It was a lot of treating people badly. Australians especially identify with the underdog. Underdogs are people who work their butt off. They are not underdog erstwhile royals who are like, we left, we want to do things our way.
Interview 4. What makes the arrangement even more interesting is that although the girls' weekend is being hosted at the Intercontinental in Coogee, sources have indicated that Meghan herself will not actually be staying there. Instead, she and Harry are apparently planning to stay at a separate 5-star hotel in Sydney proper. According to people familiar with the situation, the reason is that while the Intercontinental is a perfectly respectable brand, this specific property is currently undergoing refurbishment. The pool is not even open yet. That detail has only added to the criticism because it creates a strange contrast. The event is being sold as a wellness weekend, a luxury girls' getaway, an elevated experience, but the hotel hosting it is still in the middle of refurbishment, while the central figures connected to it stay somewhere better. That sort of arrangement naturally looks awkward. It gives the impression that the experience being sold to guests is not the same standard as the one being chosen personally by the people promoting it. Taken together, all of this creates a picture that already feels disorganized before the trip has even properly begun. The rumors were denied, then trademark filings suggested otherwise. The product list came across as bizarre. The pricing has been criticized as unrealistic. Harry's speaking role has invited irony, and Meghan's luxury retreat is tied to a hotel still being refurbished while she stays elsewhere. Even at this early stage, the trip does not appear straightforward. Instead, it already feels like a confused combination of brand promotion, image management, and questionable planning, which is exactly why so many people are struggling to make sense of it.
And since Harry still is not an internationally protected person, still does not have British taxpayer security, despite what he said in January, someone's going to have to protect them from the public. And Marcus says, oh my gosh, Meghan, you need to meet Gemma. Gemma, you need to meet Meghan. This will be great. And
Interview 5. The situation becomes even more controversial when attention turns to the person organizing the girls' weekend retreat. Her name is Gemma O'Neill, and she is reportedly an Australian businesswoman who was connected to Harry and Meghan through their mutual friend, Marcus Anderson. Marcus Anderson is known as a longtime friend of the couple and is also associated with Soho House, the members-only club chain linked to celebrities and creative figures. According to the account being given, Marcus thought it would be a great idea to introduce Meghan to Gemma so they could collaborate on this Australian venture. That is where the real problem begins. Reports indicate that Gemma O'Neill owes more than $550,000 to the Australian tax office. Over $500,000 in unpaid taxes. This is the person Meghan has partnered with for her major Australian debut, and the same person expected to organize this luxury wellness retreat. Once that information became public, the response from Meghan's side was essentially that they did not know. There had been no due diligence. No one had apparently thought to search this woman's background before entering into a business partnership and traveling across the world to appear at events with her. That explanation immediately created even more concern. It is one thing for an ordinary business arrangement to overlook something, but this involves someone who was part of the British royal family and who has access to public relations teams, lawyers, advisors, and people whose job is specifically to vet partnerships like these. If something this significant was missed, then it either points to an enormous oversight or suggests that the vetting process is far weaker than anyone would expect. It also raises a broader point about how tours and events of this kind are supposed to be organized. There is a reason real royal tours take months and sometimes years to prepare. When working royals go on official visits, teams are sent ahead, security assessments are made, background checks are carried out, local partners are carefully vetted, and contingency plans are put in place. Every detail is checked because those tours carry diplomatic, logistical, and public consequences. What this Australia trip looks like instead is something put together in a much more casual and improvised way, almost as if someone simply called a friend and asked whether they wanted to throw an event together in a few weeks. There is nothing inherently wrong with being informal if you are a private individual, but Harry and Meghan are not treated like ordinary private individuals. They still attract enormous attention, they still require protection, and their presence still creates official consequences. That reality becomes especially important when security enters the conversation. Their visit is expected to require protection, and that protection will cost Australian taxpayers real money. There has already been considerable public pushback over that point. A petition has reportedly gathered more than 30,000 signatures from Australians who do not want public funds being used to protect Harry and Meghan during this visit. That feeling is understandable. These are two people who voluntarily stepped back from royal duties and made it very clear that they wanted to pursue their own path. They have built a separate public identity, launched their own business ventures, and framed themselves as independent. So from that perspective, many people naturally ask why Australian taxpayers should be expected to cover any part of their security. At the same time, the argument being made is that the reality is more complicated. Harry is still a prince. He is still in the line of succession, whatever his exact position may be now. Australia, as a Commonwealth country, would not want the consequences of something happening to him on its soil. The diplomatic implications would be too great. So regardless of the anger, the petitions, or the criticism, the assumption is that Harry and Meghan will in fact receive security protection while in Australia, and that protection will cost money. That is simply how the situation is likely to play out. Once that is understood, the next question becomes why this trip is happening at all. On the surface, the explanation sounds neat enough. Harry is traveling for mental health advocacy, something he has spoken about for years, while Meghan is traveling for the launch of her lifestyle brand and for the girls' wellness retreat. On paper, these appear to be separate but parallel purposes that just happen to bring them to Australia at the same time. But once the connections begin to emerge, the picture starts to look different. One major angle is the Soho House connection. Marcus Anderson, the person who introduced Meghan to Gemma O'Neill, is deeply involved with Soho House. At the same time, Soho House is opening a new location in Sydney. That naturally raises the question of whether part of this Australia trip is really about helping to promote or launch Soho House Sydney. It leads to speculation that Meghan may be serving as a draw, a recognizable figure who can generate buzz for the new private members club. There is nothing inherently wrong with that if it is the case. Celebrities do promotional appearances all the time. The issue is that if such a purpose exists, it would be better for it to be stated openly, rather than hidden behind the language of a wellness retreat and mental health advocacy. The second major question surrounding the trip is whether it is being filmed. There have been persistent rumors that a film crew may be following Harry and Meghan during the Australia visit. Reports suggest permits have been filed for filming in national parks around Sydney and Melbourne, although those permits do not appear to be directly under Harry and Meghan's own production company. When Meghan's representatives were asked about this, they reportedly insisted that neither Harry nor Meghan would be filming a lifestyle show or anything described as a love letter to Australia. That denial sits awkwardly in the wider context, especially given the earlier denial that they were going to Australia at all. So while the official line may be that there will be no filming, there is still plenty of skepticism around whether cameras might be present in some form. Looking at the bigger picture, this trip does not exist in isolation. It fits into a larger pattern that has followed Harry and Meghan for the past several years. When their Netflix projects were first launched, there were big promises about the kind of content they would create and how it would connect with product launches and brand expansion. But the execution of those ideas has often appeared inconsistent. Products were not ready when shows aired. The logistics were not fully in place. Customers who wanted to make purchases ran into problems. By many accounts, the whole process looked messy. Now, something very similar seems to be taking shape in Australia. The plan appears to involve arriving in the country, generating press attention, promoting the As Ever brand, and hoping consumers will respond by buying premium-priced lifestyle products. But for that to work, the infrastructure actually has to be ready. The supply chain has to function. The e-commerce platform has to work smoothly. Customer service has to be prepared to answer questions and manage problems. Shipping logistics for another continent need to be sorted out properly. Based on the track record described so far, there are real doubts about whether all of that has been put in place. This leads into a broader point about Meghan's business approach. The pattern being described is one of moving ahead before everything is ready, announcing ideas before the products fully exist, building attention before the business foundation is secure, and generating publicity around launches that have not truly launched yet. The earlier example of American Riviera Orchard illustrates that. That was the original name for what is now As Ever. It was promoted and talked about before the trademark had actually been secured. Then, when it came time to move forward, that name could not be used and the venture had to shift to As Ever instead. All the early attention and brand building that had already been done around the first name was effectively wasted. Launching a business is difficult, and things do not always go smoothly. That much is obvious. But when someone is operating at this level, under this amount of scrutiny, with this much visibility and so much reputation attached to every move, the expectation is different. The details need to be in place before major public moves are made. Otherwise, every delay, every reversal, and every unfinished plan becomes part of the public story. That matters even more in Australia because public feeling there is already sensitive. Many Australians still remember the 2018 royal tour Harry and Meghan undertook when they were still working royals, shortly after their wedding and while Meghan was pregnant with Archie. By many accounts, that visit did not leave the best impression. Reports at the time suggested frustration, tension, complaints, and behavior that many people found hard to relate to. There were stories about confusion over the public enthusiasm, tension involving official residences, staff being left upset, and even Meghan's friend Jessica Malone being flown in from Canada during the tour to serve as a stylist because Meghan was reportedly unhappy with how she looked in. Photographs from the first few days. Whether every detail of those stories is perfectly accurate or not, the perception that stayed with many Australians was not especially flattering. That history matters because Australians place a high value on humility, hard work, and not taking oneself too seriously. They are often suspicious of people who seem overly entitled or overly grand. Against that cultural backdrop, the image of Harry and Meghan as former royals who left the system but still appear to want many of its benefits does not sit especially comfortably. So now, with them returning not as working royals, but as private figures promoting a commercial venture, partnering with someone reported to owe a huge tax debt, and still requiring costly security, it is not difficult to understand why the reception may be less than enthusiastic. Another important issue in all of this is the way commercial activity and charitable work appear to overlap during the trip. Harry's side of the visit is supposed to focus on mental health advocacy, with appearances centered on mental health in the workplace. On its face, that sounds like charitable or cause-driven work, an attempt to use his profile for something positive. Meghan, meanwhile, has the Archewell Foundation and is associated with various charitable initiatives of her own. But when charitable activity and commercial promotion take place on the same trip, the lines can start to blur. That is where some of the skepticism comes from. People begin asking whether support is going toward a cause because they genuinely care about the issue, or whether it is partly being driven by the hope of access to celebrity. The same question applies to the products. Are people buying them because they truly want them, or because the presence of a charitable element makes the purchase feel more meaningful? None of this necessarily proves that anything improper is happening, because plenty of public figures mix philanthropy and commerce in different ways. Still, it becomes something worth examining carefully, especially when the people involved are trading on a connection to the British royal family, which has traditionally drawn a very firm line between charitable work and commercial interests. That leads to a bigger question. What would success for this Australia trip even look like? If the goal is simply media attention, then the trip has already succeeded. People are talking about it constantly. Every new revelation creates more headlines, every controversy fuels more debate, and every criticism drives more engagement. From the standpoint of visibility alone, it has already achieved that purpose. But if the real objective is to sell products and build a sustainable business presence in the Australian market, then the standard is much higher. For as ever to succeed in Australia, a number of things have to go right. The products actually need to be available, which means the supply chain and logistics have to be functioning properly. The pricing has to make sense in a market where local alternatives are strong and often less expensive. The brand has to carry enough appeal to overcome the controversy surrounding it. Most importantly, the launch itself has to run smoothly. If people try to place orders and the website crashes, if delivery takes too long, or if products arrive in poor condition, then every negative impression already surrounding the trip will be confirmed. Once that happens, building a loyal customer base becomes far more difficult. From the perspective of people who understand retail and product launches, what would really be needed is a fully coordinated media campaign. Harry and Meghan would need to appear everywhere, on television shows, morning programs, podcasts, and in person. People would need opportunities to see the products, interact with them, and be guided directly toward a functional purchase page. The purchase process itself would have to work flawlessly, but based on past performance, there is obvious skepticism about whether that level of execution will actually happen. The doubt is not only about the idea, it is about whether the details will be in place when they matter. The security issue also remains a major point of concern. Harry has been involved in ongoing legal battles over his security status, and has fought to retain certain protections he once had as a working royal. Despite public claims that have been made at different times, he does not have the same standing as a full working royal in terms of international protection. In practical terms, that means a country like Australia has to decide how to handle his security when he visits. That is not a simple matter. It requires advanced planning, coordination with law enforcement, assessment of venues, backup plans, and personnel on the ground at all times. For official royal visits, there are already established diplomatic structures that manage all of this. Agreements exist, procedures are understood, and responsibilities are clearly allocated. It is expensive, but it is organized. For a private commercial visit involving someone who still carries royal status in some form, yet is no longer functioning as a working royal, the situation becomes much less clear. Questions arise over who is responsible, who pays, and what level of protection is justified. Those are not easy issues to resolve, and in the meantime, Australian taxpayers are left wondering why they should be expected to bear any of the burden. The wider media context also shapes everything about this trip. It is impossible to understand the reaction to Australia without understanding the long and difficult relationship Harry and Meghan have had with the press. From their perspective, they were treated unfairly by the British tabloid media, exposed to racism, intrusion, and constant criticism. They left the United Kingdom partly to escape that environment, and they have spoken openly about those grievances through interviews, documentaries, Harry's memoir, and other public appearances. From the media's perspective, however, the picture looks very different. Critics argue that Harry and Meghan sought publicity when it helped them, and then complained about scrutiny when it did not. They made allegations against the royal family without offering proof that satisfied many observers. They signed lucrative deals connected to media while condemning the media. They said they wanted privacy while also placing much of their personal story in public view through high-profile projects. The truth may sit somewhere between those positions, but the result is that the relationship between Harry and Meghan and the press has become deeply adversarial. That matters because every part of the Australia trip will now be filtered through that same lens of mutual distrust. Any positive story will be dismissed by critics as public relations spin or paid promotion. Any negative story will be dismissed by supporters as another attack shaped by bias. That means the actual truth of what happens on the ground may become very hard to pin down. Even basic developments will be interpreted through suspicion from both sides, which makes the entire trip even more volatile. Adding to that atmosphere is the discussion around Tom Bower's new book, Betrayal, which focuses on Harry and Meghan. Tom Bower is known for writing highly critical biographies of public figures, and this book is said to be no different. Its release, arriving at the same time as all the Australia tour coverage, adds another layer of media pressure to an already tense situation. There are claims in the book that are expected to generate more headlines and more controversy, and reactions to those claims will likely depend heavily on what people already believe about Harry and Meghan. For those who are sympathetic, it may be dismissed as another hostile hit piece. For critics, it may be treated as confirmation of existing doubts. Either way, the existence of the book ensures that every public appearance on the trip will be examined in a more intense atmosphere. That is why this entire visit now feels so loaded. It is not just a trip that appears to have been quietly planned for over a year and then publicly denied until denial was no longer possible. It is not just a commercial venture involving a business partner reported to owe hundreds of thousands in taxes. It is not only about prices that many see as disconnected from the local market, or about logistics that may not be fully prepared, or about security concerns that could cost taxpayers money. It is all of those things at once, combined with a media environment that is already primed for conflict, and a host public that appears to range from uninterested to openly hostile. At the center of all of this are two people who seem determined to continue doing things in their own way, regardless of the obstacles in front of them. Of course, it is still possible that the trip goes smoothly. The products might turn out to be well received, the events could be well attended, Australians might embrace the As Ever brand, and the whole trip could end up looking like a major success. It is possible that this becomes the moment when everything finally clicks into place, but based on the pattern that has been described so far, there is obvious doubt about that outcome. The more likely expectation is that there will be attractive photographs, some positive coverage from outlets that are already friendly, and then, slowly, stories about problems will begin to emerge. There may be reports of products not being available, of logistical issues, of customers being unable to complete purchases, of partners carrying baggage that was not disclosed, and of security costs running higher than expected. In that scenario, the cycle simply continues. Even so, the hope expressed is not for failure. The desire is not to see Harry and Meghan collapse under the pressure of their post-royal lives. On the contrary, there is a genuine sense that it would be better for everyone, including their children, if they were able to find a stable and successful path forward. But wanting that outcome does not make it real. Based on what is visible right now, the Australia trip carries all the signs of a public relations disaster waiting to happen, which is why it remains a story worth watching closely as more details continue to emerge.